aging is not just modifiable, but that it's been modified in other species. We've also learned that even among humans, we age at different rates.
Welcome to Longevity Roadmap. This is Buck Joffrey, and today we have an interesting program. We're going to talk to Dr. Jay Olshansky. This is a different perspective of longevity. He is more of a demographer rather than a basic scientist or clinician. And what he's interested in is the realistic limits of human life expectancy. And it's a pretty interesting conversation, actually. I think you'll enjoy it. We talk a little bit about the concept of longevity dividend, which emphasizes the economic and health benefits of modulating the age process. We also explore potential biomarkers and implications of longer lifespans on financial planning, for example. Lots of interesting topics, and I hope you enjoy it. And we will have the interview right after these messages. Hey, longevity enthusiasts, it's time to take it to the next level. I've been fine-tuning my longevity regimen for years, and I look better and feel better than I did a decade ago. In fact, my blood work is even better than it was back then. And it's all because of my data-driven regimen. And it's inspired me to create a course and community just for you. It's called the Longevity Roadmap, and I urge you to check it out. If you're tired of your belly fat, tired of being tired, or just want to optimize yourself for the next 50 years, visit longevityroadmap.com. That's longevityroadmap.com. Welcome back to Longevity Roadmap. This is Buck Joffrey, and today my guest is Professor S.J. Olshansky, PhD, professor in the School of Public Health at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and one of the experts on human longevity. He's earned his doctorate in sociology with a focus on biodemography from the University of Chicago and has spent decades researching the biological and demographic determinants of aging. He's the author of several influential books, including The Quest for Immortality, Aging, The Longevity Dividend, and he's best known for coining the term longevity dividend. The idea of longevity dividend is simply that slowing the aging process itself could offer greater health and economic return than curing individual diseases. Professor, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So let's just start off right away. From your vantage point, I guess, how has the science of aging evolved over the past few decades, and what key paradigm shifts have you witnessed?
It's been pretty dramatic. Look, 3 decades ago, when I got more heavily involved in these issues about upper limits to human longevity, there wasn't much in the way of advances in the world of aging science. We had some idea that it was possible to modulate the biological process of aging, but it hadn't really been accomplished much in other species. There was some evidence that caloric restriction might have some effect. But in the last 3 decades, there have been quantum leaps in aging science that have enabled researchers to learn and discover that aging is not just modifiable, but that it's been modified in other species. We've also learned that even among humans, we age at different rates. So there are people among us today that tend to live very long and healthy lives. In all likelihood, the biological clock for these folks ticks at a slower rate. And so researchers are trying to figure out what they have, what they possess, that enables them to live longer and healthier lives when the rest of the population can't.
Sure. So you studied the biological and demographic limits of lifespan in great detail. So based on your research, current evidence, what do you believe is the realistic ceiling for human life expectancy?
If you don't mind, I'm going to rephrase your question.
Sure.
So way back in 1990, we think how long humans can live, but I think it's important to go back in time and realize that historically, life expectancy for humans, prior to the beginning of the 20th century was somewhere in the 40s. Might have gotten as high as 50 in some parts of the world. And prior to that, life expectancy was probably under 30.
Now, let me interrupt you there. A lot of those statistics, don't they include a lot of birth-related deaths and early childhood? Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
That's the point, is that life expectancy was extremely low because of high infant, child, and maternal mortality. So people always had the opportunity to live to older ages. It was pretty rare historically. There's some evidence that some pharaohs could have lived up to 100 years. So old age is something that has always existed for humans, but it wasn't really until the beginning of the 20th century that we were able to manufacture enough survival time for enough people so that the average could rise somewhere, closer to 70 to 80, which is where it is today in developed countries. My latest work, I have been zeroing in on the likelihood that if you withdraw all medicine completely, all medical interventions, all dentistry, vaccines, you pull everything out. Even if you allow people to live healthy lifestyles, you probably wouldn't get a life expectancy much beyond about 60 under the best of conditions.
Sure.
Which means now that we have a life expectancy of 80, we have been successfully manufacturing time. Your profession of medicine has been remarkable in its ability to manufacture time. My life has probably been saved 3 or 4 times by medical technology. I'm currently 71 years old. The vast majority of the population in long-lived places on Earth have had their lives saved by medical technology. So it's important to realize that we are moving away from a limit, not towards it. And I know that there's constant effort to try to figure out what the upper limit is. Well, guess what? The limit's behind us by decades. And we have now been manufacturing this survival time. It's like stretching a rubber band. And I made the case way back in 1990 in an article in Science that the more you stretch that rubber band, the more difficult it becomes to stretch it further. So we predicted that the rise in life expectancy would slow down, even if advances in medical technology accelerated, unless those advances modulated aging itself, which so far it hasn't done. So the answer to your question is really the same one that we arrived at way back in 1990, which was a lead article in Science, where we estimated that the upper limit's somewhere around 85, maybe 87 for men and women combined. You have to get about half the population to live beyond that to get the average up to 85 to 87. But that hasn't changed. We just published a paper in Nature Aging last year.
Yeah. So you're saying getting life expectancy up to 85, 87 is sort of based on modern, like what we can do and what we can foreseeably do. That's where that number comes from.
Yeah. I mean, even if you cure major fatal diseases, you cure cancer, you only gain about 3.5 years. You cure cardiovascular disease, 4 to 4.5 years. You cure everything. We're not immortal. We would live to about 90 under conditions where we basically cure everything. So there's still an underlying biological aging process that marches on even when we treat or prevent major fatal diseases.
I guess one of the perspectives in the longevity scientific community who are more bullish on life extension is that the assumptions you're using are based on treating disease, whereas a lot of the focus is now on looking at the aging process itself and manipulating that. Would you acknowledge that difference?
Of course. I mean, that's the exact language we used in our 1990 article in Science. So nothing has changed. We made that case in 1990. Unless we modulate aging, we can't really push the envelope in survival much beyond where we are now.
Which I think that most people would agree with. So I know you've been critical of some people out there who talk about much longer lifespans. What is it that they're saying that you don't like or that you feel is misleading?
Well, look, the longest lived person that has been documented was a woman by the name of Jeanne Calment, who made it to 122. No one's lived beyond that we know of. Theoretically, it's possible, but we don't know of anyone. And so what happens is that you get people who make up numbers. The moment somebody says, yeah, the population is going to live to 150 or 200, when the longest lived person was 122, that number had to come from somewhere. And we know exactly where it comes from, out of thin air. People are making numbers up. And if we're doing aging science, we shouldn't be in the business of making up numbers. Now, keep in mind, in order to get these higher life expectancies, if somebody says, take this intervention or perform, this biohack exercise or whatever it is that they're advocating, and then they follow that up by claiming it's going to make everyone live 50% longer, 75% longer, that is an untestable scientific hypothesis, unless you have to wait long enough to know whether or not these interventions actually work. So
Right.
we shouldn't be in the business of making up numbers or making up science.
Let's talk a little bit about this concept of longevity dividend. Tell us what that's all about.
Well, back in, I think it was 2006, Butler and I and other scientists in the field of aging decided to put an article out suggesting that there is an economic value associated with slowing the biological process of aging. And that it's not just an economic value, but it's a health value associated with it. So we published this in an article entitled In Pursuit of the Longevity Dividend, which was basically a way of saying that there are huge social, economic, and health benefits that would accrue if we could find a way to modulate the process of aging, which again is what we said in 1990, that this is something that we need to do. You have to realize that this is a foundational change in public health that we're talking about. We've been going after one disease at a time. It's the infectious disease model applied to chronic fatal diseases. That's all it is. One disease comes up, you treat it, you push the person back out the door, and then they face something else. And we predicted that over time, enough people would live into what we call the red zone, this time period when frailty and disability is high and aging becomes the dominant risk factor, that we're not going to achieve much more. But if we could find to delay the onset and age progression of all the fatal and disabling diseases, imagine what would happen to societies if we could extend healthy life even by just a few years. And in the end, that's what we speculated on in that article, that even a minor slowdown in the rate of improvement in biological aging would yield health, economic, and longevity benefits that by far exceeded a cure for cancer. So the logic and the rationale supporting this concept of a series of dividends or benefits associated with modulating aging is what that whole concept is all about. And it's really what we all want. We all want to live healthier longer. I mean, it's not rocket science.
So what kind of interventions are you kind of referring to? Are you really looking at, again, going back to earlier in our conversation where we talk about, of course, we're looking at things through the lens of the way we are attacking disease and mortality right now. Is there ways to yield this kind of dividend that don't involve essentially intervening in the actual process of aging? I mean, is that pretty much what you're talking about, is ways to, scientifically push back the aging process and start focusing on that?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. The whole idea is to enable somebody to biologically be 60 years old when they're 70 or 75 or even 80. So you slow down biological time. Now, this isn't a new concept. It's been around for a while, and people that experience slower biological time have always been with us. They've always been here. You could see them walking down the street. You may be related to someone who is experiencing slower biological time. This is a paradigm shift in public health. This is not the same as treating heart disease or trying to prevent heart disease through diet and exercise. Although diet and exercise, they work to extend healthy life. It will still expose the saved population to an elevated risk of something else going wrong later in life. It's called competing risks. So it is a foundational change in the way in which we deal with our bodies as we grow older.
So when I think about what's happening right now, and how quickly a lot of this science is changing, especially how quickly it's accelerating, and then on top of that, the potential for artificial intelligence to augment how quickly these things are evolving, I feel like there is, not to be overly optimistic, but I feel like there, in my view, having the ability to do that to a certain extent. Now, I'm not talking about 50, 100 years, but to, be able to potentially push things out a decade, that is pretty likely the next few decades. What do you believe? I mean, obviously a lot of what you're thinking about revolves around this. What are you seeing that, gives you hope or makes you pessimistic or?
No, I'm extraordinarily optimistic that there will be one or more interventions that allow us to modulate the biological process of aging. You and I will probably be taking this intervention, whatever it is. I don't know what it is, nor does anyone else. And I cannot tell you, and nor can anyone else tell you, how much longer it might make us live. Nor can we tell you how much healthier it can make us as we grow older. These are, we have to do trials to make a determination of the safety and efficacy of any intervention that we're talking about. But I'm extraordinarily optimistic that something is going to happen. There've been enough research projects underway. Clinical trials have already begun testing some of these potential gerotherapeutic interventions that it looks as though there's a very high probability something will come online. Now, it may not be initially presented as an aging therapeutic. It may come online to treat a particular disease like diabetes, or maybe to go after obesity. And the side effect might be a reduction in the rate of general aging or senescence at the individual level. There's a lot we don't know, but the fact is that the door is wide open for us to make these kinds of interventions, and that's the key. Evolution could not have given rise to aging or death genes. We're not battling against our own genetics, and that's the huge advantage that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. Shifting gears a little bit, so you're chief scientist of, is it Lapidus Solutions?
Yes.
You've worked, using data, biomarkers, and even facial analytics to predict longevity. So tell us about that. Like, how accurate are these models at doing that? And tell us about, things that you think are particularly interesting in that research.
No one can predict exactly how long someone's going to live. That actually just can't happen. You can quite reliably predict whether or not somebody's likely to be in a more favorable or less favorable risk pool, to the right of average or to the left of average. That's not so difficult to do. People have been doing that for the last 50 years using the social determinants of health. Photographs are actually quite interesting. And several years ago, I was giving a talk to a group of CEOs from insurance companies. And I showed them a photograph of two men who were 70 years old. And I asked them to tell me how old they were, or at least how old they looked. And one of them looked older. He looked like he was whatever 70 is. I happen to be 71, by the way. And the other fellow looked like he was about 50 to 55. And I pointed out, I said, the chronological age of both of these men is identical. I said, but the guy on the left, the one who looks younger, his father is still alive at over 100, which means the face may be a viable biomarker that could be used to give you a sense of the rate of senescence.
So you're just talking about completely facial. Like, I mean, you're not even talking about looking at body comp or anything like that.
No.
Yeah.
Just face age. Just how old does your face look relative to your chronological age and relative to other people the same chronological age. And there's some suggestive evidence to indicate that people who have younger looking faces tend to live longer. Now, we have photographs of centenarians when they were younger. We have photographs of the offspring of centenarians as they were growing up, and almost universally, they all look 10, 20 years younger than their chronological age.
Yeah. I know you're, again, involved very much in actuarial or demographic research. What are the trends that you're seeing globally? I mean, I know we've talked a little bit just in general about life's age, but presumably we're really talking about the West or maybe the United States.
So here's what's happened. So back in 1990, my colleagues and I predicted that the rise in life expectancy was about to slow down. A lot of folks didn't like that. They had a vested interest in the idea that things were always going to rise and would forever rise. And we said, no, they actually have to slow down. And it's not because we're going to be unsuccessful, and it's not because we're doing anything wrong. It's because we're doing something right. And what we're doing right is allowing enough people to live long enough to be exposed to the currently immutable force of biological aging. And once you push enough people into this age window where aging becomes the dominant risk factor, the rise in life expectancy has to slow down. It has to level off. Now, some of our colleagues in the actuarial and demographic sciences disagreed with us. They said, no, advances in medical technology are going to accelerate and it's going to drag life expectancy with it. And we basically said it can't happen. So we waited 3 decades to take a look at what happened between 1990 and 2019 before COVID hit. And indeed, exactly as we had predicted in 1990, the rise in life expectancy slowed down during a time in which advances in life-extending technologies accelerated. Now, it didn't mean death rates weren't going down. They were. And it didn't mean that life expectancy wasn't rising. It was. It was just rising slower and slower and slower across time. And we've seen that almost everywhere in the world, even among the longest lived populations in the world. So that's what's happened in the last 3 decades. It's not surprising.
So what should governments and public health institutions be doing to prepare for a society where large numbers of people live well into their 90s and beyond?
Well, first of all, as individuals, we need to prepare for these longer lives and the higher probability of living deeper and deeper into the red zone, which means it's a combination of hopefully something good, which is an extended period of healthy life when we could remain in the labor force longer, encourage people to do exactly that. So there may be some, labor force implications associated with life extension, certainly with health extension. But much depends on how this is accomplished. If we can find a way to extend healthy life and delay the onset and age progression of the things that go wrong with us, which is what aging science is all about, then I think we're in for an economic boom that we have never seen before. If the flip side occurs and we push people in deeper and deeper into the red zone without slowing biological aging, chances are we're not going to like what we see. We're going to see more people with various forms of dementia living longer, and other kinds of problems with the human body. Basically, we'll be extending the period of frailty and disability. So the thing to do, of course, is to modulate what we can now, right, which is where diet and exercise come in. It's quite important and it works. And then simultaneously go after this effort to modulate the biological process of aging as a way to enhance health and quality of life going forward. It doesn't mean we should stop treating diseases. We should, because that's what we're going to face at the immediate level. But there's lots that we can do to enhance health and quality of life today and support aging science and geroscience so that we could push back the red zone and delay the onset and age progression of major fatal diseases and aging itself.
So it's interesting. I actually noticed that you were, I don't know if you were an advisor or something to some sort of financial company. And I'm very curious on this because, I also, my other interest is in personal finance and investing and that sort of thing. What conversations are happening around that? I mean, presumably, a lot of people are planning to live a certain period of time and not run out of money. Now, if you tack on a decade, that could be a good thing and a bad thing.
Well, so it's a good question. And ironically enough, just this morning, I had a lengthy conversation with a large investment firm that was looking for technology that would allow them to provide more realistic estimates of lifespan and health span for their clients. Because right now, they're doing one of two things, maybe 3 things. Number one, they're completely ignoring it. So they're not planning for the future at all. They're not really saving. A second approach is to assume generically that everyone's going to live to 95, which is pretty much ridiculous. It's not going to happen for most people. For some, it will. And then for others, the idea, of course, would be to gather as much information about these individuals as you can and provide them with an informed judgment of where they're likely to be and what the statistical probabilities are. And so these wealth management firms are very keen on gathering information that they could use with their clients rather than using a generic approach to figuring out how long someone is going to live. And that's really what we're trying to do in the world of wealth management and aging science now, is to merge these disciplines in a way that will help people plan better for their future. For some people, you got to plan for a much longer life. And for others, it may not be quite as long as you think.
So on the flip side of that, companies like life insurance companies, I'm sure you've had conversations with them. Like, what are they doing to prepare?
Well, life insurance companies like it when people live longer. They benefit from that because people then pay premiums for a longer time period. So the life insurance companies have an incentive to keep people healthier longer. So you get some insurance companies, for example, that are catering to healthier people. So some will offer, lower premiums to marathon runners or to people that exercise routinely. But these insurance companies really need to carefully evaluate the assumptions that they use going forward. Some of them use what are called mortality improvement factors, which is an assumption that is built into these actuarial models, assuming that everyone is always going to live longer and longer and longer. And I've been traveling the globe in the last 9 months, informing insurance companies that they may want to rethink that approach, that it's unlikely that we're going to experience a continuation of the kinds of increases in longevity like we observed in the past unless we do something different. You have to realize that the insurance companies are often run by physicians who aren't really knowledgeable about what's going on at the population level. They're very knowledgeable about what's going on at the individual level. When you inform them, you bring them up 50,000 feet and you let them look at what's going on to population, they suddenly realize, my goodness, what have we done? We have succeeded enormously in allowing a lot of people to live into their 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond, but they're paying a price for this. And what it does, of course, is that it increases the frequency with which the doctors will see patients because they've been successful. Yeah. So these various industries need to be cognizant, not just of where we've come, but where we're headed. And this includes both geroscience and the prospect that we might slow biological aging and what happens if we don't.
Yeah.
And they need to be planning for both of those events because it's like both are likely to happen at the same time.
So you're trained as a sociologist. What?
Not really.
No? Okay.
So back in the 1970s, the only way to get a degree in demography and aging was to go through a sociology department. I don't know anything about sociology.
Okay. Well, you probably will still know the answer to this question. I have a good answer, which is, you're in that circle again, talking about demography and how things are going to change. So what ethical or, societal questions do you think we haven't thought deeply enough as we enter an era of potentially meaningfully extending life?
So this is a critical question. I was at a National Academy of Sciences meeting in December in Washington that was zeroing in on this very issue. And that's because the researchers in this field know that we're on the verge of something big. This is not a trivial public health discovery.
It's not a pipe dream. It's real.
Not a pipe dream. Yeah. It's going to happen. And when it does, whatever intervention we're talking about, whatever intervention comes online, will instantly become perhaps the most valuable intervention in medical history. The moment you develop a gerotherapeutic that slows biological aging, instantly becomes extraordinarily valuable. Now, in the world of public health, there isn't anything that is equitably distributed. Nothing. Not clean water, not food, not clean air. Nothing is equitably distributed. And if suddenly you manufacture the most valuable commodity on earth, which is an intervention that manufactures healthy life, do you think it's going to be equitably distributed? I don't think so. So alerting the scientists that are working on and developing these gerotherapeutics to these issues of equity, I think is important. Is it enough to stop the science? Look, I just reviewed an article in a major science journal just the other day on this very issue. And I was basically echoing the arguments that were made at the National Academy of Sciences meeting. in December, and that is we need to be cognizant of what we're doing and where this is headed. But it should not stop us from pursuing this effort to slow aging. Just because we can't guarantee something is going to be equitably distributed doesn't mean we shouldn't pursue it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think also it's sort of inevitable that with new technologies, I mean, just, take the computer, for example. They always start with the rich people getting it first. And I don't know how you get around that. I mean, you're just not going to. The idea is ultimately, hopefully, that, costs for things come down, they become more commonly available, but there's always going to be inequity.
I hope so. But look, I was scheduled to have an MRI this week. MRIs are expensive to deal with a particular health issue. Do you think everybody has access to an MRI? No, they don't. It's an expensive technology. It's here now. We're using it to detect diseases or problems in our bodies earlier. If we couldn't launch MRIs because they wouldn't be equitably distributed, a significant part of the population would not benefit from it. So we're in the same boat, if not more importantly, in the world of aging science, where we're on the verge of something big happening in the world of public health. I'm glad we're engaging in this conversation. It's important that we discuss it up front, but it cannot stop, and it won't stop the aging science from accelerating and developing these gerotherapeutics that hopefully extend healthy life for all. Hopefully, at some point in the future, when they are developed, hopefully they will become less expensive. Hopefully they will be more equitably distributed, but it is unlikely at the beginning.
Professor Olshansky, thank you so much. Fascinating conversation. It'll be very curious to see what happens, but love to have you on again on the show at some point to follow up on some of these things.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
Thanks for listening. A quick reminder that while I am, in fact, a surgeon, nothing I say should be construed as medical advice. Now, make sure to include your physician in any medical decisions you make. And also, if you're enjoying the show, please make sure to show your support with a like, share, or subscribe.